There's a bench in Stockholm where miracles happen. Not the kind you read about in fairy tales, but the quiet kind, the ones built from coffee, compassion, and a heart that refuses to look away. Before we dive into this incredible true story, pause for just a moment and tell us in the comments where in the world are you watching from right now? And have you ever helped a stranger without expecting anything in return? Drop your country and your story below. Now, let's begin. There's a bench in Stockholm where miracles happen. Not the kind you read about in fairy tales, but the quiet kind. The ones built from coffee, compassion, and a heart that refuses to look away. This is the story of three people. 3 lives connected by a single truth. Kindness is never forgotten. Alara Bergstrom was 27 years old, 6 months pregnant, and absolutely exhausted. Every morning at 6:45, she would wake in her tiny apartment on the outskirts of Stockholm, pull on her gray hotel cleaner's uniform, the one with the white collar that barely stretched across her growing belly anymore, and tie her blonde hair back into a neat bun. She would rest one hand on her stomach, feel her baby move inside her, and whisper the same words she'd whispered for months. "One more act of kindness, little one. Just one more." Then, despite her swollen ankles and the ache in her lower back, despite the fear that kept her awake at night, Alara would walk. She'd walk through the quiet cobblestone streets, past the elegant buildings with their perfect window boxes, past the people who had homes and futures and certainty. She'd walk until she reached Gardet Park, where the morning fog still clung to the grass and the ancient oak tree stood like a guardian. And there, on the same weathered wooden bench directly beneath that oak tree, sat a woman the world had forgotten. Her name was Freja. She was in her late 70s, with silver hair that hung loose around her face and deep lines carved into her pale skin. Lines that told stories of hardship, of winters survived, of a life that had once been different. Her clothes were layers of tattered fabrics, brown and gray, worn so thin they barely kept out the cold. Her hands trembled constantly, spotted and wrinkled, the hands of someone who had worked hard and received little in return. Every single morning, Alara would approach slowly, one hand supporting her pregnant belly, the other holding a paper cup of warm coffee and a cinnamon bun from the bakery near her apartment. "Good morning, Freja," Alara would say softly, her voice gentle in the early quiet. Freja would look up with eyes that held both sadness and gratitude. "Alara, dear child," she would whisper, "you shouldn't be doing this. Not in your condition. You need to save your money for that baby." Alara would smile, that tired, beautiful smile, and place the warm cup into those trembling hands. "My baby will be fine," she'd reply, "but you need to eat today." This happened every single morning, rain or shine, through autumn storms and winter frost. And every single morning, people judged. "Look at her," a jogger whispered to her friend one gray Tuesday morning, barely lowering her voice. "She's pregnant and wasting money on a homeless woman. That money should be going to her baby." A businessman in an expensive coat actually stopped one morning, positioning himself directly in front of Alara with his arms crossed. "Excuse me," he said sharply. "You're clearly just a hotel cleaner, yet you're spending what little money you earn on this." He gestured dismissively toward Freja, as if she were an object rather than a person. Alara stood up slowly, one hand on her belly, her blue eyes suddenly blazing with a fire that made the man take a step back. "This," Alara said, her voice steady and strong, "is a woman named Freja Anderson. She has a name. She has dignity. And yes, I choose to spend my money making sure she knows that at least one person in this city sees her as a human being." "You're being irresponsible," the man insisted. "What about your child?" "I'm teaching my child," Alara said firmly, her hand moving in slow circles over her stomach. "I'm teaching my baby that being human means caring for others even when it's hard. Even when you're scared. Even when you have almost nothing yourself. My child will learn that we don't look away from suffering just because it's inconvenient." The man shook his head in disgust and walked away. Freja had heard everything. Tears streamed down her weathered face, catching in the deep lines around her eyes. "Alara," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Why? You don't even know me. You don't know my story." Alara sat back down beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "I know enough," she said quietly. "I know you deserve better than this bench. I know you deserve to be seen. But you're struggling too," Freja protested, looking at Alara's worn uniform, her swollen belly, the exhaustion in her young face. "You're about to be a single mother. You need help as much as I do." Alara was quiet for a moment, watching the morning light filter through the oak tree's branches. Then she spoke with a conviction that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her. Freyja, I may be tired. I may be broke. I may be terrified of what comes next. She paused, her hand resting on her belly. But I have a roof over my head tonight. I have hope. And if I can bring you breakfast every morning, then I'm not as poor as I think I am. Freyja reached out with her trembling hand and placed it gently on Alara's pregnant belly. The baby kicked. Freyja gasped, her eyes widening with wonder. A fighter, she whispered, a smile breaking through her tears. This baby is a fighter, just like the mother. What Alara didn't say, what she couldn't say, was the full truth of her situation. The baby's father had disappeared the moment she told him she was pregnant. Her family, strict and unforgiving, had turned their backs on her. She was 3 months behind on rent, 1 eviction notice away from homelessness herself. At night, alone in her tiny apartment, she was absolutely terrified. But every morning, bringing breakfast to Freyja gave her something her fear couldn't take away: purpose. If she could matter to one person, even one forgotten person on a park bench, then maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as powerless as she felt. Mrs. Holmgren, the wealthy hotel owner who employed Alara, had been watching these morning visits with quiet concern. One afternoon, as Alara struggled to clean a guest room, moving slowly because of her pregnancy, Mrs. Holmgren gently took the cleaning supplies from her hands. "Sit down, Alara," she said softly. "We need to talk." Alara's heart dropped, fear flooding through her. This is it, she thought. I'm being fired. But Mrs. Holmgren sat beside her with unexpected tenderness in her eyes. "I've watched you for 6 months now," she said. "Every morning, pregnant and exhausted, you bring food to that woman in the park. You arrive late because of it. Yet you never complain. You never make excuses." She paused. "What you're doing is extraordinary." "It doesn't feel extraordinary," Alara said quietly, tears threatening to spill. "It feels like the bare minimum of human decency." "Exactly," Mrs. Holmgren said, her voice thick with emotion. "That's what makes you special. Tell me, is there a connection between you and this woman? Is she family?" Alara shook her head. "The first time I saw her was the same week I found out I was pregnant. I walked past that bench, and something in my heart just broke open." She placed both hands on her belly. "I looked at her, forgotten, invisible, alone, and I thought about this baby growing inside me. And I realized, Freyja is someone's daughter too. Maybe someone's mother. She didn't stop being worthy of love just because life destroyed her." Mrs. Holmgren's eyes filled with tears. "You're going to be an incredible mother." But as Alara walked home that evening, she wasn't so sure. How could she be a good mother when she was about to be homeless? The weeks continued. Alara's pregnancy advanced into her 7th month, then her 8th. Her exhaustion deepened. The eviction notice came. She had 2 weeks to find somewhere else to live, and nowhere to go. But still, every single morning, she brought breakfast to Freyja. One cold November morning, as Alara handed her the coffee, Freyja suddenly grabbed her wrist with surprising strength. Tears streamed down her face. "I can't do this anymore," Freyja said, her voice raw with anguish. "Alara, I'm not okay. I haven't been okay for 15 years. I live on a bench. You can't save me. But you can save yourself and that baby. Please stop sacrificing for someone who's already lost." Alara knelt down despite her pregnant belly, wrapping her arms around the frail woman. "You're not lost," she whispered fiercely. "Not while I'm here. Do you hear me? You're not lost." They clung to each other beneath the ancient oak tree, 2 women the world had tried to break, holding each other up with nothing but love. Neither of them knew that 3 blocks away, in a corner office on the 14th floor of the Lindgren Enterprises building, a man in an elegant dark coat stood at the window with binoculars in his hands. He had been watching them for 2 weeks, and tears were streaming down his face. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, he would finally approach. Tomorrow, a 30-year secret would be revealed, and 3 lives would be transformed forever. The next morning arrived differently. Alara felt at the moment she turned the corner into Gardet Park. Something in the air had shifted. The fog was thicker than usual, clinging to the ground like a held breath, and as she walked toward the ancient oak tree, her heart began to pound for reasons she couldn't explain. Freyja was there, on the bench as always. But she wasn't alone. Standing beside her, dressed in an elegant charcoal coat with a deep blue scarf, was a man. He appeared to be in his early 40s, with dark hair touched with gray at the temples, and even from a distance, Alara could see the quality of his clothing. the kind of expensive simplicity that only the truly wealthy could afford. But what stopped Alara in her tracks wasn't his appearance. It was the fact that both of them, Freja and this stranger, were crying. Alara rushed forward, nearly spilling the coffee in her hand, one arm protectively around her belly. "Freja," she called out breathless. "Are you all right? What's happening?" The man turned toward her, and Alara saw his face clearly for the first time. His eyes were red and swollen, tears streaming down his cheeks, but there was something else there too. Something that looked like joy mixed with unbearable pain. "Are you Alara Bergstrom?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Yes," Alara said, positioning herself slightly in front of Freja, protective. "Who are you? What's going on?" The man took a shaky breath, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "My name is Nikolai Lindgren," he said. "I'm the CEO of Lindgren Enterprises." He paused, his voice breaking. "And I've been searching for this woman for 15 years. Alara's eyes widened. "What? Why?" Nikolai's face crumpled and fresh tears spilled down his cheeks. "Because 30 years ago," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "when I was a miserable 12-year-old boy whose parents cared more about their fortune than their son, this woman saved my life." He looked at Freja with such devastating love that Alara felt her own eyes filling with tears. "My father was one of the wealthiest men in Scandinavia," Nikolai continued, his words tumbling out as if he'd been holding them in for decades. "We had a mansion in Djursholm. We had cars, boats, vacation homes across Europe. We had everything money could buy." He paused, his jaw tightening. "But I had nothing that mattered. My parents were ghosts. My father lived in his office, obsessed with expanding his empire. My mother lived at charity galas and spa retreats, more concerned with her social standing than her son. I was 12 years old, and I was so desperately lonely I used to pray I would just disappear." Alara's hand moved instinctively to her belly, as if to protect her unborn child from such pain. "Then one day," Nikolai said, his voice softening, "my father hired a new housekeeper. Her name was Freja Anderson." Freja sobbed, covering her face with her trembling hands. "Freja wasn't like the others," Nikolai continued, his eyes distant with memory. "The other staff were efficient but cold, treating me like I was just another piece of expensive furniture. But Freja," his voice broke. "Freja asked me how my day was. She helped me with my homework at the kitchen table. She packed my lunches with little notes inside. She came to my school events when my parents were too busy." He looked directly at Freja, kneeling down in front of her despite his expensive coat touching the dirty ground. "For 5 years, you were the only real mother I knew," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Everything good in me, everything kind, everything human, exists because of you. You taught me that love wasn't something you had to earn. You taught me that I mattered." "What happened?" Alara whispered, tears streaming down her own face now, one hand resting on her pregnant belly. "Why did you lose each other?" Nikolai's expression turned to anguish. "When I was 17, my father's company hit financial trouble. It was temporary, but my father panicked. He started cutting costs everywhere. His hands clenched into fists. Freja was let go. After 5 years of caring for me, of being the only light in that cold house, she was dismissed with 2 weeks severance and no recommendation letter. Just gone. I was away at boarding school in Switzerland," he continued, his voice hollow. "By the time I came home for the holidays, she had already left. My parents refused to tell me where she'd gone. They said it was inappropriate for me to contact the staff." He looked at Freja with profound guilt. "I tried to find you. Even as a 17-year-old, I searched. But I had no resources, no connections of my own. My parents controlled everything." "What changed?" Alara asked softly. "I grew up," Nikolai said simply. "I took over the company when my father died 5 years ago. Lindgren Enterprises is now worth over 1.2 billion euros. And the very first thing I did with that money, before expanding, before investing, before anything else, was hire the best private investigators in Europe to find you." He looked at Freja with desperate eyes. 15 years. I've been searching for 15 years. Every database, every shelter, every hospital, every social service agency across Scandinavia. I never stopped looking." Freja reached out with a shaking hand, touching his face like she used to when he was a boy. "My dear child," she whispered, "you never forgot me." "How could I?" Nikolai said, pressing her hand against his cheek. "You're the reason I'm not like my father. You're the reason I have a heart at all." He turned to Alara, and his expression shifted to something like wonder. 2 weeks ago, I was in a meeting in my office. I looked out the window, just a random glance, and I saw something that made me stop breathing. Alara's heart began to race. I saw a pregnant woman in a hotel uniform, Nikolai said, his eyes locked on hers. And she was bringing food to a homeless person on a bench. The same bench. Every single morning at the same time. He pulled a pair of binoculars from his coat pocket. It reminded me of Freja, of her kindness, her compassion. So I started watching. Every morning for 2 weeks, I stood at that window and watched you. Alara felt a chill run down her spine. And then one morning, the fog lifted just right, and the sunlight hit the bench at a certain angle, Nikolai said, his voice trembling. And I saw her face. He looked at Freja, tears streaming freely now. After 15 years of searching the entire continent, there you were. 3 blocks from my office. Sitting on a bench I'd walked past 1,000 times. Freja was shaking, overwhelmed. Nikolai, I never thought. I never dreamed. I watched for 3 more days, Nikolai said, because I couldn't believe it was real. I was terrified I was wrong, that I was seeing what I wanted to see. But it was you. And every single morning, this remarkable woman, he gestured to Alara, brought you breakfast. He stood up, pulling 2 envelopes from his coat. Freja, I'm not a powerless 17-year-old boy anymore. I'm a billionaire. My father's company, the one that threw you away like you were nothing, is mine now. His voice grew stronger, more determined. And I'm going to make this right. He handed the first envelope to Freja with trembling hands. I've purchased a house for you. A cottage in Gamlistan with 3 bedrooms, a garden, and a view of the water. The deed is in your name. You will never sleep on a bench again. Never. Freja opened the envelope with shaking fingers, and when she saw the documents inside, she collapsed forward, sobbing into her hands. Nikolai, I can't accept this. You can and you will, he said firmly but gently. You gave me a home when I had none. You gave me love when no one else would. Now I'm giving you both back. Then he turned to Alara, and his expression was one of profound respect. And you, he said softly, a pregnant woman, working as a hotel cleaner, barely able to pay your rent, about to be a single mother. Alara's breath caught. How did he know about her struggles? I had you investigated, Nikolai admitted. Not to invade your privacy, but because I needed to understand who you were. I needed to know what kind of person stops for someone the entire world walks past. He held out the second envelope. This is a certified bank check for 400,000 euros. Half for you. Half for your baby's future, education, healthcare, everything you'll need. Alara's knees nearly gave out. She gripped the bench for support, her pregnant belly making her balance precarious. Mr. Lindgren, I can't accept this. I didn't help Freja for money. I did it because it was right. I know, Nikolai said, pressing the envelope into her hands. That's exactly why you deserve it. Do you know how rare you are? In a city of nearly 1 million people, you were the only one who stopped. The only one. He pulled out a third document. I'm also establishing the Freja Anderson Foundation for homeless individuals across Europe. And I want you to be the director. Salary, 150,000 euros per year, full benefits, 6 months paid maternity leave, childcare support, everything you and your baby need. Alara was shaking, tears streaming down her face as she held her belly. Why? She whispered. Why me? Nikolai's eyes filled with fresh tears. Because you have what money can't buy, and what I spent my entire childhood desperately needing. You have a heart that sees people. You have compassion that costs you everything and gives anyway. He looked between Freja and Alara. 30 years ago, Freja taught me what love looks like. And 2 weeks ago, you showed me that her legacy is still alive in this world. Freja reached out, taking Alara's hand with one of hers and Nikolai's hand with the other. Her trembling fingers connected them, forming a circle beneath the ancient oak tree. My boy, she whispered to Nikolai, her voice thick with emotion. You became everything I prayed you would be. Because of you, Nikolai said, his voice breaking. Only because of you. Freja turned to Alara, squeezing her hand. And you, dear child, you have a heart that will change the world. That baby, she placed her other hand on Alara's belly, is going to be so proud of who you are. The 3 of them stood there beneath the oak tree as the Stockholm morning fog slowly lifted and golden sunlight broke through the branches above them. 3 people connected by 30 years, by kindness, by the simple truth that love, real love, never forgets. Somewhere in the park, joggers continued their morning runs. Business people hurried past, late for meetings. The world kept spinning, oblivious. But on that bench, beneath that tree, 3 broken lives had just been made whole. And everything was about to change. 1 year later, Alara stood in a garden filled with late autumn flowers, her 1-year-old daughter balanced on her hip. The little girl, named Freja, after the woman who had changed everything, giggled and reached out with chubby fingers toward the golden chrysanthemums swaying in the gentle breeze. "Careful, sweetheart," Alara whispered, guiding those tiny hands to touch the petals gently. "We're kind to beautiful things." Behind them, the cottage door opened, and the elderly Freja emerged, moving with a grace and health that hadn't existed a year ago. She was wearing a soft lavender cardigan, her silver hair neatly styled, her face glowing with contentment. She looked like a completely different person from the trembling woman who had lived on that bench. "Dinner's almost ready," Freja called out, her voice strong and warm. Nikolai just arrived with the wine. Inside the cozy cottage, the one Nikolai had purchased, with its view of Stockholm's old town and its garden full of flowers, the dining table was set for 4. Candles flickered in the dimming light. The scent of roasted vegetables and fresh bread filled the air. This had become their ritual. Every Sunday evening, without fail, a chosen family bound not by blood, but by something stronger: gratitude, love, and the memory of a park bench beneath an oak tree. Nikolai was in the kitchen, laughing as he struggled with a corkscrew. He'd loosened his tie and rolled up his sleeves, looking nothing like the powerful CEO who commanded boardrooms across Europe. Here, he was just Nicky, the name Freja had called him when he was 12 years old. "I run a €1 billion company," he called out with mock frustration, "but I still can't open a bottle of wine without help." "That's because money doesn't teach you practical skills," Freja teased, taking the bottle from him with a knowing smile. "Come here, dear boy. Let me show you." Again, Alara watched them from the doorway, baby Freja squirming happily in her arms, and felt her heart swell with an emotion she barely had words for. A year ago, she'd been terrified, alone, and days away from homelessness. Now she had this, a family, a purpose, and hope for the future she was building. The Freja Anderson Foundation had opened its first shelter 6 months ago, a beautiful facility in central Stockholm with 50 beds, medical care, counseling services, job training, and most importantly, dignity. They'd already helped over 200 people transition off the streets. 2 more shelters were under construction in Oslo and Copenhagen. Alara ran the foundation with baby Freja often strapped to her chest in meetings or napping in the on-site childcare center. She discovered she had a gift for this work, for seeing people the way she'd seen Freja that first morning, for understanding that homelessness wasn't a moral failing, but a circumstance that could happen to anyone. After dinner, as Nikolai cleared the plates and Freja prepared coffee, Alara bundled little Freja into her stroller. "I'll be back in an hour," she said, kissing the baby's forehead. "You're going to the park," Freja said softly. It wasn't a question. "I always go to the park," Alara replied with a gentle smile. Nikolai looked up from the sink, his expression tender. "You don't have to anymore, you know. You've already done so much." "I know," Alara said simply. "But there's always someone." She walked through the cobblestone streets as the evening settled over Stockholm, the lights beginning to twinkle in windows, the air cool and crisp. Little Freja babbled happily from her stroller, completely unaware that this simple journey was part of her mother's promise to the world. When Alara reached Gardet Park, the ancient oak tree stood silhouetted against the darkening sky. And there, on the same bench where elderly Freja had once sat forgotten, was a young man. He couldn't have been more than 25, with hollow cheeks and eyes that looked haunted. His clothes were dirty, his backpack torn, and he was sitting with his head in his hands in that particular posture of absolute despair that Alara recognized all too well. She approached slowly, not wanting to startle him. "Excuse me," she said gently. The young man looked up, immediately defensive. "I'm not bothering anyone. I'm just resting." "I know," Alara said, her voice kind. She held out a paper cup of coffee and a wrapped sandwich. "I thought you might be hungry." The young man stared at the offering like it was a trick. "Why?" he asked suspiciously. "What do you want?" "Nothing," Alara said, setting the food beside him on the bench. "I just wanted to make sure you knew that someone sees you tonight. Someone knows you're here." The young man's defensive expression cracked, and his eyes filled with tears. "You don't even know me." "I know enough," Alara said, echoing the words she'd once spoken to another person on this very bench. "I know you deserve better than this. I know you're struggling. And I know that tomorrow is another day, another chance." She reached into her bag and pulled out a card. This is the address of a shelter that opened 6 months ago. It's called the Freja Anderson Foundation. They have beds, hot meals, showers, and people who can help you find work if you're ready. No judgment. No strings attached. Just help if you want it. The young man took the card with shaking hands, staring at it like it was a lifeline thrown across dark water. "Why are you doing this?" he whispered. Alara smiled, looking down at her sleeping daughter in the stroller. "Because a year ago, someone showed me that one act of kindness can save a life. That kindness saved 3 lives, actually. Mine, my daughter's, and someone I love very much." She met his eyes. "Your life can be saved too. You matter. And tomorrow morning, I'll be here again. And the morning after that. You're not invisible. Not to me." The young man began to cry, his shoulders shaking. "I don't even know your name." "My name is Alara," she said gently. "And this is Freja. And we see you." She stayed with him for 20 minutes, just listening as he told her about the job he'd lost, the apartment he couldn't afford, the family who had given up on him. She didn't offer empty platitudes or quick solutions. She just listened, bore witness, and reminded him that his story wasn't over yet. When she finally headed back to the cottage, baby Freja awake now and looking up at the stars, Alara felt that familiar sense of purpose settle in her chest. The world was full of people on benches, people the rest of society had learned not to see. But she would keep seeing them, one coffee at a time, one conversation at a time, one life at a time. Back at the cottage, Nikolai had built a fire in the fireplace. Elderly Freja was knitting a blanket for the shelter, her hands steady and sure now, no longer trembling. When Alara walked in with the baby, they both looked up with expressions of such love it took her breath away. "Come sit," Freja said, patting the sofa beside her. "Tell us about tonight." Alara settled in, baby Freja crawling across the carpet toward Nikolai, who scooped her up with practiced ease. "There was a young man," Alara said, 25 years old. Lost his job, lost his apartment. Sitting on the bench like he'd lost hope too. "Did you give him the foundation's card?" Nikolai asked, bouncing little Freja on his knee, making her giggle. "I did," Alara said. "Whether he comes or not, at least he knows someone cares." Nikolai looked at her with profound respect. "Do you know what you've created? In just 1 year, the foundation has helped 217 people find housing. 43 have found permanent employment. 12 have reconnected with their families. Those aren't numbers," Alara said softly. "Those are lives. Those are people who were sitting on benches, invisible, and now they're not." Freja set down her knitting and reached for Alara's hand. "Do you remember what you said to me that first morning? When that businessman told you that you were wasting your money?" Alara smiled. "I said you had a name. You had dignity. You gave me more than breakfast," Freja said, her voice thick with emotion. "You gave me back my humanity. And look what that single act of kindness created." She gestured around the room, at the cottage, at Nikolai, at the baby, at the life they'd all built together. This is what happens when someone refuses to look away. Nikolai raised his glass of wine, his expression solemn. "I'd like to make a toast," he said, "to Freja Anderson, who taught a broken boy what love looks like, who showed him that kindness isn't a weakness, it's the strongest thing in the world." He turned to Alara Bergstrom, who showed a forgotten woman that dignity can't be taken away, only temporarily hidden, who proved that one person really can change the world. "And to little Freja," elderly Freja added, her eyes shining with tears as she looked at the baby, "who will grow up knowing that kindness is the family business. That love is never wasted. That every person on every bench deserves to be seen." "To kindness," Nikolai said, his voice strong. "To kindness," Freja echoed. "To kindness," Alara whispered, kissing her daughter's head. Baby Freja, as if understanding the weight of the moment, clapped her tiny hands together and laughed, a pure, joyful sound that filled the room like music. Outside, the ancient oak tree stood guard over the empty bench in Gardet Park, its branches swaying in the evening breeze. Tomorrow morning, there would be someone new sitting there. Someone forgotten, someone invisible, someone who had lost hope. And tomorrow morning, Alara would be there too. With coffee, with kindness, with the simple message that had saved 3 lives and would continue saving more. "You matter. I see you. You're not alone." Because that's what kindness does. It doesn't just change one life. It creates a chain, an unbreakable chain, that reaches forward through time, touching people who haven't even been born yet. 30 years ago, a housekeeper showed love to a lonely boy. 1 year ago, a pregnant woman showed dignity to a homeless woman. And tomorrow, someone else would receive kindness from a stranger, and the chain would continue. This is the truth that Alara understood in her bones. We save each other. That's what we're here for. That's what makes us human. One coffee at a time. One conversation at a time. One act of kindness at a time. The world changes. So let me ask you something. Right now, today, is there someone in your life, in your city, in your neighborhood, maybe someone you pass every single day, who has become invisible? Someone who's sitting on their own bench, forgotten by the world? Maybe it's a homeless person you walk past on your way to work. Maybe it's an elderly neighbor who lives alone. Maybe it's a coworker who always eats lunch by themselves. Maybe it's someone struggling in silence, waiting for just one person to see them. Here's what I want you to do. This week, just this week, do one small act of kindness for that person. Buy them a coffee. Ask them how they're doing and actually listen to the answer. Acknowledge their existence. Let them know they matter. Then come back to this video and tell us what happened in the comments. I promise you something will shift. Maybe for them. Maybe for you. Maybe for both. Because that's the truth that Alara discovered. Kindness isn't just something nice we do. It's the most powerful force in the world. It creates chains that last for decades. It saves lives in ways we can't even measure. Your one small act of kindness might be someone's miracle. If this story touched your heart, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to this channel for more stories that will restore your faith in humanity. And most importantly, go out there and be the person who stops. Be the person who sees. Because the world needs more people like Alara. More people like Freja. More people like you. Thank you for watching. Now go change someone's life.